Titus Kaphar's 2014 painting, Behind the Myth of Benevolence, struck me immediately when I first saw it. Who is this woman who's being obscured? And who is the guy that's covering her up? And why is she being covered? Why does the work feel so historical yet so contemporary? In this video, I will launch an investigation into all of these questions and more. Please stick around to gain a bunch of art historical knowledge, and also subscribe to my channel if you are not already. Okay, see you on the other side. The creator of the artwork, Behind the Myth of Benevolence, Titus Kaphar, often utilizes 18th and 19th century European portraiture aesthetics and compositional modes to reestablish what Black identity can and will be. Kaphar makes clear his understanding of Blackness as a malleable identity completely tied to representational histories. It is in this attempt to amend history that Behind the Myth of Benevolence exists, a work that shows off Kaphar's studied yet critical engagement with the art of the past. By simultaneously using and establishing its iconic conventions, he asserts the central presence of the African American subject in the formation of Western visual culture and contributes to the spread of images of diverse Black personhood in popular visual culture. Now on to the work itself. Behind the Myth of Benevolence, created in 2014, is not one painting, but two. The primary portrait is a standard rendering of Thomas Jefferson, which we'll get back to in a minute. Yet, the canvas has also been peeled back from its stretcher, almost 3/4, gentle folds creasing the subject's dark brown robe and blush red skin. Only one of his eyes looks out over the spectator, half of his story folded in on itself. Small punctures on the folded canvas's edge imply a gentle removal rather than a tearing or ripping away from the wooden backing. Behind this canvas lays another. A figure peers out shyly from behind Jefferson's overwhelming stature to tell her own story. Did she pull the canvas down? Did he accidentally leave the curtain open? The layering can be seen as an effort to dramatize the empathetic, bodily relationship between viewer and work. Behind the Myth of Benevolence was originally shown in the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. However, this is strange because the work is not a singular portrait. It could be described as a sculpture or even a scene painting, but certainly not a single portrait. This is important to note because the work as a whole gains more meaning within its environment. By being displayed in the National Portrait Gallery, the artwork is in direct conflict with dominant notions of portraiture, the matter with which it is contending. It leans into the tensions and depictions of Blackness between visibility and mystery, between past and present, between here and there. In addition to pushing the boundaries of portraiture content, Kaphar's work expands the material definition of portraiture. Portraits are images that are able to portray something about the character of a person solely through their facial presentations and surroundings. Titus Kaphar is subverting this notion by having a portrait of Thomas Jefferson peeled from its canvas to reveal another work behind it. The work exists in a present space but speaks to the historical legacy of Black repression and lack of representation. A young Black woman, the revealed figure, seems to be in a moonlit setting, a bluish light coming from both the foreground and background of her scene. The brightest elements of her surroundings are a gorgeous green and gold silk scarf around her head and a golden jug that sits upon a blue pedestal beside her. The silvery bowl at her feet and golden jug might imply that she was bathing before being exposed by who or whatever peeled back the canvas. She confronts the viewer with her dark gaze, eyebrow furled, seemingly asking who we are and why we've interrupted her. Her dark skin provides a stark contrast to the pale portrait folded over her. The gold and green scarf seems out of place within the painting because of its implied luxury and deep glittering hues. Knowing nothing about the central figure, we might assume it was one of her most prized possessions. Much like the rest of the items surrounding her, the scarf serves to heighten the woman's status. A thick, dark teal fabric extends from the top left of the secondary canvas down to a solid surface and then is draped to shadows at the woman's feet. The silver bath she uses fronts the fabric and reflects the overly saturated orange floor, not unsimilar to the warm undertones of the woman's face. The space behind her darkens to gray, creating endless possibilities for the depth and space of her imagined location. Though the woman is the hidden figure, arguably she still manages to serve as the central figure of the work, her skin and stature demanding of a viewer's attention and curiosity. If visual portrayal can humanize a subject, then revealing this woman who has for so long been hidden behind Thomas Jefferson and his aesthetic pedestal gives her a moment in a larger historical narrative. This moment forces the viewer to understand her humanity beyond her relationship to Jefferson. While Kaphar does note that the woman he chose to portray is suggestive of Sally Mae Hemings, the enslaved black woman with whom Thomas Jefferson had several children, he is clear in establishing that it is not exactly her. Sally Hemings was 1/4 black, which would have made her skin much lighter than the woman's skin in the painting. For Kaphar, the woman is representational. She is doing the work of existing as a symbol for the many women whose liberty was taken from them and whose tragic, quote-unquote, relationships with white men have been shrouded by historically inaccurate narratives of deified men in positions of power. In maintaining her anonymity and denying her identity as Hemings, Kaphar's portrayal refuses to lean on black iconicity, a term art historian Nicole Fleetwood argues can be used to discuss works in which, quote, in the focus on the singularity of the image, the complexity of black lived experience and discourses of race are effaced. Furthermore, an absence of visual representation of Sally Hemings leaves Kaphar total liberty in exploration of her aesthetic construction. Effectively distancing her from a fixed identity, Kaphar has allowed this woman an intricacy and symbolic presence beyond the historical record's assigned definitions of her identity. By removing her from historical context, conceptually reimagining her physical appearance, and materially placing her behind Jefferson, Kaphar has separated her from any true notion of a real historical self. If the viewer understands the central woman and sees her as human, then Kaphar has effectively recreated his own telling of history, a critical amendment. Rather than being some denigrated object belonging to Thomas Jefferson, this woman is taken into Kaphar's hands as a symbol of her own black humanity. Her humanity justifies her place in history and thereby brings into question her absence from both narratives surrounding Jefferson and the broader historical record. Rather than viewing Kaphar as resourceful, as simply picking through classical Renaissance aesthetics for his own purposes, his work can be viewed as a clear indication of the necessity of the imagination in crafting blackness to combat modern cultural politics. If objectification and essentialization are the default of Eurocentric interpretations of black visual identity, then crafting a new, unknowable black self, using pre-existing images, even exclusionary European ones, is at the center of Titus Kaphar's work. If the work of these two overlapping portraits is in the relationship between its subjects, then it is important to divest the meaning of Thomas Jefferson's portrait from that of the woman he is covering. The painting of Thomas Jefferson is based on a widely recognizable presidential portrait of the statesman by Rembrandt Peale. Painted in 1800, this particular portrait is generally regarded as Peale's masterpiece. Peale was a young portraitist at the time that came from a family of artists with names such as Titian, Rubens, and Raphael. Given Peale's status as an artist and the quality of the rendering, the portrait is often revered by critics for its portrayal of Jefferson as a thoughtful leader solely through the subject's gaze and lighting choices made by the artist. As a visual representation of Jefferson's personhood, Peale's portrait poses as a complete opposite to the woman covered up within Kaphar's work. It is also worth noting that Titus Kaphar has mirrored the original Peale portrait, Jefferson now facing right instead of left like he was in the original, perhaps implying that we are viewing Peale's portrait from behind, Hemings now covering Jefferson's image from this point of view. Thomas Jefferson was seen as intellectually brilliant, full of personal humility, active in his service to the American Revolution, and deeply involved with his interests in architecture and classicism. As a president and leader, much has been written of him, most of it extremely laudatory. However, not often recalled in historical text on Jefferson is his longtime quote-unquote relationship with his enslaved mistress, Sallie Mae Hemings. Born in 1773, Sallie Mae Hemings was the daughter of Thomas Jefferson's father-in-law, John Wales. She studied French and music alongside Jefferson's daughter, Marie Jefferson, in Paris for 2 years in 1787. She is often referred to in newspapers as a, quote, Monticello slave, or, quote, Jefferson's slave mistress, someone to accompany Jefferson's story rather than a figure who deserves a story of her own. The quote-unquote relationship Jefferson and Hemings had resulted in 7 children, 5 of whom lived through to adulthood. Sallie Hemings is a little-known figure in American history, defined by her relationship to a white historical figure. Even in being the daughter of Thomas Jefferson's father-in-law, she herself is mixed race and born of a similar kind of sexual relationship that she went on to have with Jefferson. Both an investigation into the moral character of Thomas Jefferson and the life and stories of a Black woman who relates to him, Kaphar depicts visual narratives of Black subjectivity beyond the heroic mythologizing of white figures that traditionally obscure non-white bodies from view. Further, an absence of visual representation of Sallie Hemings leaves Kaphar total liberty in exploration of her aesthetic construction. Kaphar is participating in what theorist Saidiya Hartman, in her acclaimed 2008 essay Venus in Two Acts, called a critical fabulation. Hartman, in responding to the absence of enslaved voices in historical narratives, called for a historical approach that would, quote, jeopardize the status of the event, to displace the received or authorized account, and to imagine what might have happened or might have been said or might have been done. The intent of this practice is not to give voice to the slave, but rather to imagine what cannot be verified, a realm of experience which is situated between 2 zones of death, and to reckon with the precarious lives which are visible only in the moment of their disappearance. Here, Hartman notes archives not as a limitation of enslaved people, but as a space of the speculative and imaginary for historians hoping to understand their place within a greater historical narrative. In Kaphar's interpretation of Sallie Mae Hemings, he has made clear a gesture that simultaneously honors and compensates for her existence as a Black woman neglected by history. Kaphar's fabrication enables her to exist both as a specific person and as an imagined symbol for Black womanhood within a visual narrative from which she has been excluded. Kaphar is not the only artist who is interested in this idea of imagination when looking to history. We might consider his work alongside contemporary Black artists such as Lyle Ashton Harris, who photographically inserts himself into historical narratives through a queer lens, or Kehinde Wiley, who utilizes compositional conventions of Renaissance paintings in his painted portraits to give regal connotations to everyday Black subjects, or the painter and collage artist Mickalene Thomas. Like Titus Kaphar, some major part of these artists' works rely on visual conversations that borrow from traditional compositional frameworks of white, Eurocentric, Western art history. More recently, Titus Kaphar has been interested in subtraction from historical narratives rather than addition. For example, in his work Shifting the Gaze, which he created in 2017, he covers a white family portrait to shift focus to their Black servant boy. A more forceful take on previous versions of historical amending, his work can be seen as shifting towards a more visually assertive mode of Black self-making. Hi, thank you so much for watching that entire video. Please give it a thumbs up, and if you learned something new, share it with a friend. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, goodbye!